This is Logan, and he's going to be my audience. We don't have anybody else here, so we just FaceTime three other people: Bryce, Casey, and Chase. And they're the rest of my friends. They're just going to walk back there. Before the founding of science and reasoning, there was a time when humans tried to figure out why stuff happened by themselves. Some, like the Scandinavians, had this harder than others because of the harsh climate, or they didn't have communication with other people because of the barrier of water. These reasons forced the Scandinavians to believe in or put their faith in their own myths and legends that they created. By the end of this speech, I want the audience to know what some of the myths and legends are, why they were formed, and how it helped the Scandinavians or the Vikings um, prosper in hard times. Scandinavian myths and legends are usually based around weather or climate or natural phenomenon. As in, Thor is the god of thunder, and once they saw thunder or lightning, that's why they based him off of lightning, because he was fierce and aggressive. But we'll get to that later. According to NorseGods.com, there are two types of gods: the warrior gods, or the Aesir, that fought giants or the bad stuff, and the Vanir, which are the light bringing, the lovers, the fertility, the hearth, the basically the warmth gods. Now, before we begin, Scandinavian myths can get confusing at times, but as the website ancientorigins.net states, you just have to remember that they believe in multiple worlds or universes, so that's how they fit everything into one big sphere. They believe in this tree called Yggdrasil, and they have nine worlds connected to it. That's how they connect all their worlds together. That's how they connect all their giants, elves, dwarves, and humans and gods together is Big Tree Yggdrasil. And we're not going to talk about all the nine worlds because I don't have time. I'm just going to have to talk about some specific gods that live in Asgard, which live at the top of Yggdrasil, and some and the giant species as a whole, because it kind of helped the humans prosper in the long run. So we all know the Thor, the god of thunder, from the movies, and if you don't, then you have to get out and go watch a Marvel movie. But the movies kind of dulled him down. He's not as fierce as he is in Norse mythology. He's kind of more friendly in the movies. In Norse mythology, they kind of base him off a lightning strike as it is, so very, very fast, very hard, very destructive. But they put him on their side, so it's in a good way, and sometimes it's in a bad way because his father Odin, the king, wants to pass the crown on because he's getting so old. But it kind of creates some controversy if you have a destructive king, so Odin's trying to hold on to the crown as long as he can. And this hurts because Odin is the patron of all the gods. He is based off the sun, which brings light, which brings hearth, which brings warmth, which brings hearth, which pushes back the darkness that the night brought. And the older he gets and the longer he sits on the throne, the weaker he gets, which means Asgard gets weaker in total. And that just creates a whole nother story, which we're not going to get into because I don't have time. But Odin is basically the patron of all the Vikings themselves because he was kind of the first Viking. He didn't love war, but he accepted it. He knew what was necessary. He knew how to fight. He loved death in battle. He thought it was the best honor ever. So he created the Hall of Valhalla, which was a basically a hall for all the dead that died in battle, just to party for eternity. And so if that was passed on to all the Vikings of Scandinavia and all the military presence of Scandinavia at the time. So Scandinavian Vikings or warriors weren't afraid of dying, which made them a very destructive force. And that's why they went and pillaged and went to look for fights when they needed to get food or resources because their climate is so harsh. And also, it created a huge military intimidation factor, so there was no incoming war or no enemies tried to attack them, which made the population just prosper because there was no outside force. Now, Odin and Thor, as we talked about, are warrior gods. They're Aesir. They battle the giants, which are like the bad guys. And this is the reason because there was a couple people, giants were formed because a couple people went into like the frost mountains or the cold mountains because it was cold, and they died from frostbite or avalanche or natural cause. But the people thought that they died from a creature, and they just formed a giant in their head because they heard the wind going through the mountains, and they thought they heard screaming. So they thought, well, a giant ate their friends. So they spread that word around. And once word got around that giants lived in the mountains, people stopped going to the mountains, so they stopped exploring the mountains. And in in return, they stopped dying in the mountains, so there was less casualties from environmental crisis, and that kind of helped the population. Sorry. But that helped the population immensely because it was just going throughout the whole country. So if someone died from an environmental cause, it didn't have to be from a mountain. They just placed a random creature there that they made up, and they actually believed it was that creature, so nobody else went there. And that just helped the balance the population out from dying from environmental challenges. So all the harsh winters and stuff, they kind of helped them out, actually, the giants per se. Now, as I said before, both Odin and Thor are Aesir, but in Norse myths novel published by Arcturus, there are also Vanir, the other type of god, which is the lovable god, the hearth god, the fertility god, the one that is kind of a pacifist but can fight if they want to. And two of these are Freya and Freya. They're brother and sister, that's why they sound so much alike. And these gods, people believe in them when they don't believe, they pray in them when there's sickness or there's disease or there's just someone trying to give birth, your wife or yourself. And they don't really help per se, but they're a great morale booster in case the townspeople are getting depressed or emotionally or mentally not disabled but abused or have lack thereof health of emotional or mental. And they didn't know that back then, so they just put their faith in those gods, and that kind of alleviated some of that or eased some of that off, and that helped out immensely. Now there's a plethora of many stories of myths and legends that helped people throughout the ages in Scandinavia, but I can only do those because of time. But those were the basis of the ideologies of some of the gods and the giants that helped Scandinavia through crises and war and famine and disease. And this proves that it helped them through it because in triviciary.com, the Scandinavians and the surrounding areas were a major part in the military defense of Europe. And in modern day times, they're a big part of NATO and the European politics. So they believed in the wrong thing, but it helped them create a big and better nation as a whole and together. Thank you.